Hi, this is Anastasia Betts in the 685 Design-Based Research course, and this is my presentation on how I would implement my design-based research study. So the topic that I'm studying is the world of parent-child math interactions. So some things that we know from the research is that many parents don't believe it's important for them to engage in math activity with their child. Yet we know from the research that parent-child math interaction is positively correlated with student math achievement. And as a result, stakeholders, whether that's in nonprofits like Head Start or businesses like Age of Learning, which is an ed tech producer, or schools, both private, public, and charter, they would like to increase parent-child math engagement because we know that it leads to better child math achievement. So just to summarize, the problem is that parent-child math interactions positively impacts child math achievement, but parents interact very little with their children on math topics. So the question that we have is, how can we better understand the factors that influence parent choices to participate in math activities with their children so that we can develop ways to increase parent-child math-related interactions? So the purpose of my study is to examine those factors, the things that influence parents' decisions to interact with their children through math. Why do they interact with their child through math, or why don't they interact with their child through math? And the purpose is to determine if there are certain types of parents that exhibit similar patterns of influences acting on them in similar ways. So for example, you might have parents who are math anxious who prefer to do certain types of activities over other activities. Or you might have busy, really busy parents who don't have a lot of time, and so the types of activities that they're willing to do may be very different from the activities that maybe they're being invited to do by the children or by the schools or teachers. So we want to determine if there are relationships between these types of parents and the kinds of math activities that they're most likely and most willing to do with their children. So just a little definition of terms here. What do we mean by math activities? So we mean anything potentially related to math that is occurring between parents and children. So for example, cutting a brownie in half to share it, or dividing out grapes. I get one, you get one, I get one, you get one, or counting out money in a piggy bank, or playing a board game that involves counting spaces. But it can also include more formal things like doing flashcards or helping your child with homework. And also not just, I know it says number sense in the bottom right corner here, but any kind of conversation or interactions that involves mathematical concepts, whether that's concepts of number or shape or spatial relationships and so on. All right, so what are the foundations of this study? Well, this study is grounded in social learning theory of Bandura, Marjorie Banks, and Vygotsky. So Bandura talked about children learning by observing in their environment, and there are this idea of models that are models that are the examples upon which, oh gosh, I don't know what's happening right now. Strange. Models upon which children are basing their imitated behavior. And most of the models in their lives are their parents or their siblings or their grandparents. And children learn how to behave or what to do or how to act through the positive and negative feedback that they receive in response to their imitating of these examples. And then to take that a little further, Marjorie Banks examined the connections between the home environment and parents' expectations of their children and their child's performance. So, for example, if parents really expect their children to do well in sports, then the child knows that sports are important to their parent and are likely to try harder to attain their parents' approval or attention around sports. So the same thing is true for math. If the child knows that math is important to the parent, the child is more likely to try to achieve in math. And then lastly, there's the Vygotsky's social cultural learning theory, which is, talks about the idea of the more knowledgeable other. The parents is the child's first teacher, and the parent helps the child grow by supporting the child in activities that the child can't do alone. And this, brings to mind the ZPD, or the zone of proximal development, which is the space between what the child can do alone and what the child can do with help. And parents are in a prime position to work with their children in their children's ZPD by helping them through shared math activities. Okay, so one of the things that I did in figuring out kind of what I wanted to research was I looked at models of parental involvement. And one model of parental involvement that was really important to my research was Hoover, Dempsey, and Sandler's model of parental involvement. It has 5 levels, but I'm just focused on the first 2, which revolve around the parent. And as you can see here in level 1, Hoover, Dempsey, and Sandler have found that these were all the contributing factors that contributed to whether or not a parent would get involved with their child. So things such as the parental role construction, parental self-efficacy, and then over here, their perceived time and energy and their perceived skills and knowledge. And then lastly, the invitations that the parent is receiving to be involved, invitations from the school or the child or the teacher. And then all of those things influence whether or not the parent will get involved, and also how the parent gets involved. This is a general model of involvement, but I really wanted to look at something that was more specific to mathematics. So in the course of doing this research, I developed a framework called the RESET framework, the MAP RESET framework. So MAP, M-A-P-P, stands for Math Activity Participation of Parents, and RESET stands for these dimensions of the framework: the role, efficacy, skills, expectations, and time. And basically the idea is that all parents would fall along some sort of continuum in each of these domains. For example, in perceived role construction, a parent could believe that it's their role to be very involved in their child's math learning, or all the way to the other end of the spectrum, which is like, I'm not going to be involved in my child's math learning. That's up to the teacher. And for efficacy, that could range from a parent who's very, very anxious, who's not sure about their ability to be successful with their child, or worried about their ability to successfully teach math to their child, versus confident in their ability to do so. And then there's skills and knowledge, which is, a parent might perceive that they have low skills and knowledge in mathematics, or high skills and knowledge, or somewhere in between. And then the next one, which was not part of the Hoover-Dempsey model, but was an important part of the research, which was parent expectations of their child's performance in math. They could believe that math is unimportant and it's not important for their child to do well in math, or they could believe that it is very important and very important for their child to do well in math, or somewhere in between. And lastly, the time and energy constraints. The parent could perceive that they are unavailable to interact with their child, or completely available. So the idea we had is that if there was a way to measure parental characteristics along these dimensions, that we could develop a profile for that parent of the kinds of activities that he or she would be more likely to do. So that leads us to the study. The specific research questions we have for this study are: what types of parents can be identified using the MAP RESET model, and what relationships exist between parent types and the kinds of math activities they do with their children. Now let's look at the iterative design of this study. this we're thinking of having, I should say, I always say we, but I'm thinking of having several different iterations for this study. So for iterations 1 and 2, really what we're looking at is the validation of the survey instrument that measures parent characteristics along those dimensions. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to do a small sort of initial pilot study with 30 parents, which is going to be more qualitative. It's mixed methods, but more qualitative in nature, where we interview these parents and just get a sense of kind of what their thinking is in response to parent-child math interactions. And then we're going to use the information in that to develop a better survey that then we're going to roll out to a sample of 300 plus parents online. And then the goal is to try and see if cohorts or types of parents do emerge from the data that we gather. And so then we would move into iterations 3 through 5, which would involve using that survey with different groups of parents, along with an activity experiment where we ask parents to choose. We give them a collection or a catalog of activities and ask them to choose activities from the collection to do with their children every week, and then see if there's a relationship between certain types of activities that parents choose to do and their their identified parent type or cohort. And the reason I say that these are iterations is because we anticipate making changes to the experiment through every iteration. So, for example, in iteration 1, we're interviewing parents. We have some assumptions about the kinds of questions we want to ask related to the MAP reset framework, but we're not sure, and we expect to find things that we didn't think about. We'll use that knowledge to create a new survey that we can then test and validate. Then we'll use that survey with iteration 3, along with a catalog of activities that we anticipate will be able to demonstrate differences that parents could subscribe to, in terms of like, this activity is appealing to me or this one is not. But based on what we find out from this focus group in iteration 3, we'll adjust the collection of activities or our delivery mechanisms to deliver iteration 4. What's interesting about iteration 4 is that this is specifically with a low resource, underserved population of parents, Head Start parents. And we anticipate finding out things from this group of parents that we didn't find out in all of the other iterations. That will continue to inform our MAP reset model in terms of, do we find different types of parents in this cohort, or do we still see the same types of parents, even though these parents may have different needs and requirements? And then the last iteration that we're going to do is with completely digital subscriber parents for this the app that we're looking at, which is Mastering Math. Mastering Math is an adaptive digital platform application for pre-K through second grade students, and we're planning to reach out to their parents who are the subscribers to this for their children to ask them if they want to be part of this study. So it will be a completely digital version to look at the ways in which things might differ from, the Head Start parents and the focus group of parents are parents that we're dealing with in person, through, in the physical space. But iteration 5 is parents who are interacting with their children through math in a digital space. So it'll be a new, hopefully give us some new information as well. All right, just to give you an example of what the study design might look like, this is just for iterations 1 and 2. So we have our questions, we have our initial sample of 30 parents that we're interviewing. We're going to do a semi-structured interview and survey, and then conduct a qualitative and primarily a qualitative analysis, although we will get a little bit of quantitative data from the survey, but more we're interested in the qualitative analysis. After that, we'll use what we find from that to finalize the map reset survey instrument, which we'll administer to sample 2. We'll do the data collection. We'll do a qualitative analysis and a quantitative analysis from that survey because it has both open and closed questions. We'll use the confirmatory factor analysis to confirm the loading of the items on the construct factors, Chromebox Alpha to test reliability, cluster analysis, and I think here, instead of Pearson's correlation coefficient, we'll probably be using chi-square. But anyway, that basically we'll be using all these statistical tests to see if we can find out if there are actually cohorts of parents with similar characteristics, and then we'll do triangulation of that and then the conclusions, and then we would move on to iterations 3 through 5. Okay, so how does the study make use of DBR? Well, Wang and Hanafin proposed that DBR has 5 main characteristics. It's pragmatic, grounded, integrative, iterative, and contextual. And so the ways in which my study exhibits those 5 main characteristics is that it's pragmatic because it's trying to solve a real-world problem, which is to increase not only parent-child math interactions, but it's trying to educate parents and increase parental awareness of the importance of early childhood mathematics. You know, we've done a really good job in the last 50 years of really getting parents to understand the importance of reading to your young children, you know, from the literacy space. But we have done absolutely nearly nothing to help parents understand the importance of also interacting with their children through math. So it is a pragmatic, it does exhibit pragmatism in that we're trying to solve a real problem that, if whatever we find out from the study, could potentially really help parents better understand the importance of their interactions with their children. It's grounded in that it's grounded in several theoretical and conceptual frameworks, including the social learning theory of the family, Vygotsky's sociocultural learning theory, and Hoover-Dempsey's parent involvement model. And it's also grounded in the real-world context of the home, where parent-child interactions are most likely to occur. It's integrative in that we're integrating approaches across disciplines. For example, we're planning to draw heavily on prior work done in the cognitive and psychological sciences to help develop and test our survey. And as previously discussed, it's iterative. The design process is iterative and flexible, and we plan to adjust the design of the study instruments over each cycle of the experiment, refining and revising based on what we learn. And it's contextual in that it's highly contextualized because the context for the experiment is the home, situated in the relationship between the parent and the child in a naturalistic setting. And the findings from this study will apply outside of the study. It has great application to just parent and child development. All right, so what are some challenges to this study? Well, aside from my Head Start population, most of the samples may or may not be representative of the overall parent-child population. We are going to try and account for that in the iteration 2 with the survey of 300 plus parents. Because we're using a marketing research firm to provide those parents, we can request that the participants meet certain demographic limits or minimums. And but overall, it's a start, but it doesn't really. We're not working with as diverse populations as I would prefer. But I'm hoping that as we move forward beyond this study, we'll be able to get more diverse parent populations. Um, a really big challenge is working within the constraints of some of the stakeholder environments. For example, Age of Learning, the stakeholders at Age of Learning, at the Children's Institute, which is the nonprofit that manages the Head Start centers, and then also working with the Head Start centers themselves is a huge challenge by making sure that we're working together and that we're making decisions together about how to implement this, how to work effectively with the parent groups. There is an interesting thing is that Children's Institute, they have like a parents board, a parents board that we're planning to work with to implement this. And they're highly interested in how do we not just study this with the population, but educate the population about the importance of parent-child math interaction, so that their children, so that we're engaging in some parent education as well. So, but I think that's one of the things that really makes this a DBR study, because we are working with these various stakeholders too, as one of the authors said in one of the papers I read, that not just study the population or the problem, but to actually seek to help the participants to improve their lives and their social context. So another challenge, I think, is promoting participation of the parents in all the various samples that we're looking at. I think participation in some of the samples is easier than others. Like, for example, the iteration 1 and 2 is just a survey and an interview, so that's pretty easy. But once we get to iterations 3 through 5, where parents are actually being asked to complete activities with their children, I think we could experience some challenges in keeping parents involved. But that's where I think that our work and our collaboration with the teachers and Head Start Center administrators can really help us, and also the parent board at Children's Institute can really help us promote the involvement of the parents. For the parents that are in the Mastering Math iteration 5 sample, that's something that I'll need to partner with Age of Learning on, to make sure that we have proper incentives in place in the digital tools to ensure that parents are not only incentivized to do the work, but also that we're able to capture what they're doing in the digital space. And lastly, maintaining consistent ongoing communication with all the stakeholders is probably always a challenge. And just making sure that we're communicating and sharing our thoughts, and scheduling regular updates, and also collaborative brainstorming meetings and reflection meetings between the iterations to decide how we want the process the process and the study to evolve. And then lastly, something I didn't put on here, but something that's really important I'm finding as I move forward with this, is because this is DBR, and because there will be changes between each iteration, I'll have to update my IRB over and over and over again. So working with the individuals at the IRB or in the UB IRB office to ensure that my IRB stays up to date and approved, and just maintaining all of that paperwork is another aspect of a challenge that I need to be aware of. All right, so that's all I have. I just want to say thank you so much for all the learning that I've been able to do in this class, and I look forward to your feedback and ideas that you might have. Thank you so much.